Awesome. I am beyond thrilled to be here to talk about a paradigm shift in the nutrition space, being able to think about different health outcomes. So I'm calling it a revolution. There's a lot of people that are excited about bridging the gap between physical and mental health, and I'm definitely one of them, and grateful to be here um, and see some people that have helped train me along the way. I saw Lauren, Dana. I know I was in school with Leah. I did my undergrad at USC. I did my master's at Cal State Northridge. Um, my internship through UCLA. I've always been interested in topics off the beaten path. So you could see I did my master's thesis in nutrition and substance abuse. My clinical practice is nutrition and recovery here in Los Angeles, a group practice doing work at the intersection of mental health. And my PhD is from UCLA in public health. I have a minor in health psychology. I am an eating disorder dietitian. I practice functional medicine. I do some writing, and I am the founder of the Wise Mind Nutrition app. Um, my practice has allowed me some really unique insight. We've worked at over 50 treatment centers in the last 10 plus years, mostly substance use disorder, some eating disorder, some mental health. We know that these lines are pretty blurry. So, yeah, I'm able to combine my, you know, uh, clinical practice with the research that I've done, um, and really try to offer some unique insight here today. As you guys know, nutrition is a contentious space. There's just a lot of disagreement, arguments, tribalism, as some people like to call it. We have group formation based on a nutritional identity, and it feels unsafe. I know a lot of dietitians that have left the field entirely, and if I'm completely honest, it has crossed my mind. There are times when the diet wars just feel super uncomfortable, and I know a lot of dietitians connect with this. I actually was talking to someone recently, and they offered an interesting theory that I had never heard. Someone said, historically, through evolution, when we can break bread with people, it's some level of safety and connection. And when people eat very differently than us, it like lends itself to this feeling of like, oh, we don't break bread together. We are not of the same. And it creates this sort of in-group, out-group phenomenon that we're seeing in the nutrition space. So toward the end of today, I'm going to be talking about very briefly this free resource that I have to offer to help people enhance mental well-being, mental health using nutrition. So I've spent a lot of time and effort to try to build a new framework, and I'm going to cover some of the science and some of the energy that I hope to really get out there into the world. And once again, really excited to be here. This is just a graphical abstract of where some of this is heading. I will be talking about ultra processed foods a little bit today. There's been a lot of research and a lot of conversation around it. We all know that it's a source of added refined sugars. We know that low fiber diets, low polyphenols can lead to intestinal permeability. We know that compromised gut health can affect mental health, depression, cognitive decline, dementia. And then it gets real tricky because in the mental health space, we also have eating disorders, which is a big part of the work that I do. And in many ways, ultra processed foods are a part of a lot of types of eating disorder treatment under the famous guise of all foods fit. And so there's some blind spots right now with respect to ultra processed foods, in mental health. We also have ultra processed food addiction, which is controversial, and I will be discussing it. I want to start with depression because this is the most robust evidence. This came out 2 years ago. It was not without criticism and debate in the scholarly community, but it was a systematic review that concluded that the main areas of serotonin research provide no consistent evidence of there being an association between serotonin and depression, no support for the hypothesis that depression is caused by lowered serotonin activity or concentration. So from the available data, this theory that is in many ways pushed by big pharma, that all depression should be treated with an SSRI, has been deeply challenged in recent years. So suggesting that while there are some people that do well on serotonin um, reuptake inhibitors, a lot of people have different phenotypes of depression. So we have this emerging inflammatory phenotype of depression, And there's lots of potential pathways. I'll just touch on a few. Of course, the HPA axis responsible for the output of cortisol, which is supposed to be anti-inflammatory, can eventually, become a pro-inflammatory cascade with the release of cytokines. We know that cytokines can cross the blood-brain barrier. And we know that tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin. So there is some data to recently suggest that the pathway from tryptophan to serotonin can be diverted to other pathways, for example, to kynurenine, which can become quinolinic acid, which is known to be neuroinflammatory. This can happen at the level of both the gut and the brain. A recent paper showed that this diversion from tryptophan away from serotonin and toward kynurenine is modulated by gut microbiota, which shouldn't come as a surprise. So we're still trying to figure out, the difference between neurotransmitter activity that happens at the level of the gut versus that happens at the level of the brain. There's much more work to be done, but I think the main point is that there's a lot of causes of depressive symptoms that are not just serotonin based. To date, we have 7 randomized controlled trials that show that nutrition interventions can improve depression. And these are not weight loss studies. Okay. So this is a group in Australia where a lot of this work is done that pooled all the nutrition interventions that had depression as an outcome and excluded weight loss studies. Okay. So overall, all 7 of them showed positive results, and it's not a surprise. These are diets that promote minimally processed foods and decrease the intake of ultra processed foods. I know that we're dietitians here, so we're going to get into some of the mechanisms real briefly, and then I'm going to broaden the conversation and talk about this movement more generally. But this paper from China recognized that we know dietary fiber is linked to depressive symptoms, but this is mediated by CRP. So dietary fiber decreases inflammation, and decreased inflammation decreases depressive symptoms. So we all know here that what we eat matters. I'm sure some people believe it more than others, but a big part of what this science is starting to show is that food is way more than calories. Food is way more than macros. Food is even way more than micronutrients. There's a lot going on that's invisible. So just to summarize the depression diet mechanistic schematic, we have all the components of quote unquote healthy eating: vitamins, minerals, types of fat, types of fiber, phytonutrients, etc. And again, this is all pretty new work, so hasn't fully been fleshed out in its entirety, but there's several pathways through the HPA axis: oxidative stress, inflammation, gut microbiota, epigenetic changes. And I think if I were to add one piece here is that if you were to move the needle on one of these things, like change, add olive oil or start eating more fiber, it probably wouldn't be sufficient to, really move the needle on depressive symptoms. But if someone was doing all of these things in conjunction with lifestyle medicine, maybe some testing to get some clarity on some specific interventions at the micronutrient level, we're seeing good outcomes. I am actively treating people that have depressive symptoms using nutrition. I don't want to reduce depression to a nutrition model. Of course, we know that there are biological, psychosocial, and cultural factors. Nutrition is just a part of it, but I think the consensus from at least the scientific literature is that clinical management of depressive symptoms should include nutrition intervention. So predictably, omega-3, vitamins, minerals, fibers, colorful produce, etc. Most people are aware of the data on the Mediterranean diet. We do have several randomized controlled trials to date that show Mediterranean style eating can improve depressive symptoms. But the key point that's worth making is that these are not things that are easily observed over short periods of time, weeks, months. Sometimes these benefits are observed long-term. So it's a life course perspective on nutrition for mental health rather than some sort of an acute management. This conversation we're having today isn't super popular here in the US. I'm not going to say that it's popular in other countries, but if you look at the actual source of the scientific evidence, a lot of the papers are published in Australia, UK, certain parts of Canada. The stuff we're going to talk about today related to ultra processed food comes from Brazil. And at the University of Sao Paulo, Dr. Carlos Monteiro, they've done some incredible work. And I think we're moving slowly here in the US. And I also want to acknowledge that there's definitely factors that I probably don't even need to spend time discussing. But I will say this, and this is a call to action. Mental health professionals are moving in on nutrition faster than dietitians are moving in on mental health. Okay. Therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, they are getting involved in people's nutritional care. And we as dietitians are not moving fast enough. And we're going to lose. So nutrition for mental health has three major areas. The first is nutrients that support brain health. I think this is the obvious one. There's direct effects, for example, omega-3 getting into cell membranes, affecting neurotransmission. That's one example. Of course, there's B vitamins, other minerals, magnesium that have both direct and indirect roles in brain health. The second area is gut health. And by the way, if you have questions, you can type them in, but we'll definitely get to them toward the end. I want to get through all the slides and make sure I cover everything, and there will be time at the end for discussion. You guys probably know a lot about gut health at this point, the bidirectional gut-brain axis. And the area that I am deeply interested in, and this is me coming as a person that's done counseling for 11 years, I've worked one-on-one with over 1,000 people, is how we think about food, how we think about body, the language that we use, the energy, the charge. And this is the emerging topic of nutritional psychology, looking at how stress, trauma, and adversity can be embodied, get underneath the skin, affect physical and mental health. This brings into the picture other issues, socio-contextual issues, body image, etc. So nutritional psychology is a multidisciplinary approach that is at the intersection of psychological, behavioral, gastrointestinal, neurological, and nutritional sciences. So this is how I was trained to think. My work is always, biopsychosocial, looking at mechanisms, looking at thought processes, looking at context, right? I believe that we do live in a world where we are in silos academically, clinically, and we tend to reduce things to our own discipline. This is called discipline bias. So to get perspectives that try to integrate all these different perspectives is critical for nutrition for mental health. There is a lot of biology involved, but it's not just biology. We have to think about the larger context of society, weight stigma, internalized weight stigma, the role of diet culture, etc. All of these things affect cognitive processes around food. Perhaps you've heard the term nutritional psychiatry. This is a little bit more biomedical, right? More focused on biomarkers, doing lab testing to understand some of the antecedents and consequences of behavioral health disorders. So it's a little more mechanistic. An example of nutritional psychiatry would be combining an SSRI with nutraceutical augmentation, folate, zinc, omega-3. It's a growing field. It's great to be a part of it. A lot of psychiatrists, a lot of psychiatric nurse practitioners, a lot of holistic practitioners, and certainly some dietitians in this movement. When we cover the gut-brain axis, it's always important just to recap the important pathways. We know the autonomic nervous system is involved, the vagus nerve connecting the back of the brainstem to the various organs, including the GI tract through the enteric nervous system. The HPA axis, which is related to stress and the output of cortisol. We know that neurotransmitters are produced in the gut by gut bacteria. It's still not clear how much of that impacts the brain. We know that, for example, people cite, 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut. That doesn't necessarily mean that it crosses the blood-brain barrier, but we do know of other postbiotics that are important, short-chain fatty acids, for example. My interest has been in the immune system, the way that inflammatory cascades that start in the gut can travel throughout the periphery and cross the blood-brain barrier. So this is the best biological, mechanistic way of me understanding the gut-brain axis is through inflammation, neuroinflammation. Okay. So my mission, one of my missions, is to get nutrition to be less vanity focused. Okay. I think if you were to survey random people and ask them about nutrition, they would mention calories, macros, my fitness pal, percent body fat, muscle, that sort of thing. And nutrition for mental health is really about moving people toward an understanding of how food can affect mood, outlook, energy, vibration, relational health, quality of life. And it's a tough sell, right? You guys work in the healthcare system, so you need measurable outcomes, right? You got to document numbers, right? And so I'm not suggesting that we'll be able to move away from quantitative nutrition toward qualitative nutrition in the healthcare system. But it's definitely an energetic shift that could be thought about in counseling. Um, I measure depression, anxiety, trauma. Um, the app that I have looks at after the fact as well. So just thinking about nutrition with respect to different outcomes, I think is a main point of the talk today. When you think about like the recommendations that I'm going to throw at you in the next 30 minutes, none of it's like that different than anything you're already familiar with, right? The tenets of Mediterranean style eating, like, oh, shocker, fiber, polyphenols, right? None of it's groundbreaking, but where it's different is that we're able to reach people differently. We're able to get people motivated on a different basis. People feel less marginalized. People are less traumatized by the message. So I was taught in statistics that all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. It was one of the most groundbreaking things I ever learned in my life. We're given models, we're given ways to think. For example, the calorie model, the macronutrient model, the micronutrient model. We're given all these different models, ways to view nutrition, right? I like food group models. I don't love my plate, but I like food group models because it's simple to help people get all the different food groups every single day is an easy thing to do. Anti-inflammatory models based on the dietary inflammatory index, gut health models, which are an extension of anti-inflammatory models, in my opinion. And then, of course, personalized nutrition, functional medicine, right? Using stool samples, blood tests, urine tests, saliva, all to bring together personalized recs. And nutrition for mental health brings a lot of these together. I'm not really big on the calorie model because I think it's misleading and incomplete. But of course, there's room for all models. If you're a dietitian, you probably know by now that diets become a dirty word. Most people associate it with restriction. We have this, incredible non-diet movement, which is more inclusive and weight neutral, body positive, less stigmatizing. And it's a reaction to diet culture, right? Which is this idea that controlling your body, particularly your diet, is normative behavior. And I think, we've also seen in the last few years the anti-diet movement, this full swing of people that are calling you out for being interested in health at all. And I know that that's a generalization that's a little bit sweeping and perhaps extreme, but I think a lot of us are starting to ask the question, is there a middle ground somewhere? Can we promote health without it being weight focused, numbers focused? Can we promote health without it feeling like diet culture? And I think there's a way forward. I really, really do. And I want to just first start off by saying that there's a need for dialectics here. Okay. It's like, I'm going to talk about ultra processed foods in a minute. And, it's like, it's very obvious based on our evidence that ultra processed foods are negatively affecting mental health. Right. But we also know that diet culture is, problematic and affecting people's mental health. So how do we message? And it's really important to find these intersectional gray areas. So I've made the argument that, not wanting to promote foods from multinational billion-dollar food corporations like Coca-Cola, Nestle, General Mills is not diet culture. A lot of times when people are being upset about the food environment, it gets classified as diet culture. And as I stated, diet culture is something different. It's a pervasive belief that appearance and body shape are more important than other facets of well-being. So pushing back on companies that have complete monopoly on the food system is not diet culture. These are companies that deliberately engineer food for the highest palatability, using addiction neuroscience, market products to children, alter brain reward, and are largely responsible for the global type 2 diabetes epidemic. So we're living in this controversial space, right? People that are calling out ultra processed foods are getting called out. I really want to encourage y'all to read this paper. Susan L. Prescott does a lot of good environmental health work. She's identified the history of ultra processed food. While there's a surge in interest in it, it's not new. People have been talking about this for decades. And the paper actually walks you through how anyone who expressed concerns about ultra processed food are labeled as food fattists, pseudoscientists, purveyors of myths, right? So it's my opinion that to really understand nutrition, we have to understand systems, uh, food companies, economics, capitalism, etc., because there's just a lot of conflicts of interest. So we need the wise mind. This is a term used in dialectical behavioral therapy. It replaces rigid black and white thinking with both and thinking, right? So it's an effort to think of things simultaneously rather than either or. So for example, we have in DBT the reasonable mind, which is cool and rational and task focused, and the emotional mind, which is more hot and mood dependent. The wise mind sees the value of both, right? It looks at things as systems. For example, the gut brain axis. It's an effort to find the middle path, right? And most people don't like nuance and don't like middle paths. It's so much easier to find a tribe in the nutrition space, whether it be vegan, plant-based, or carnivore, keto, diet versus non-diet, people that like ultra-processed foods versus people that want to stay away from them. And it seems like, these groups form and people feel safe in these groups. Nutrition for mental health is about non-duality. It's about breaking down walls, helping people see both ands rather than either ors. And it's difficult, meaningful work. And it necessitates an understanding of human psychology and an understanding of cognitive rigidity versus cognitive fluidity, right? People have different ways of making sense out of the world. Some people need rules. Some people need guiding principles. Some people that need rules so much would be better off needing rules a little bit less. Some people that are really fluid would benefit from a little bit more structure. And I think that this is an important piece that's not highlighted in classic dietetic counseling. So this is dialectics, right? It assumes that multiple models exist. Stop extrapolating one model onto the general population. It's not about right or wrong or black or white. It's about intersectionality, shades of gray. And our field has become susceptible to a lot of bias. And I think what I've observed is that some of this comes at a price to practitioners and to patients, right? You want to know, are you with us or are you with them, right? Are you food addiction or are you intuitive eating? Which camp are you in? You have to decide now. And it's totally departed from science. As an eating disorder professional, everything that I do is eating disorder informed, which means that the information has to be safe, non-triggering. We avoid words like diet, any sort of weight talk, any sort of math can be problematic, in my opinion. There are people that do well with math, but a nutrition message that removes that high level of certainty, like 5 significant figures, and decimal points, people like that precision, I think is wise for the sake of mental health. We always try to encourage hands-on nutrition, shopping, cooking, mindful, soulful eating, encouraging consistency, variety, helping people figure out what to include rather than what to avoid, and encouraging sanity over vanity. Trauma-informed nutrition is a lot of buzz. I've made some contributions to this space. I believe that in order to really understand trauma, we have to understand the biological embedding of adversity, understanding that health isn't simply a choice. We have to acknowledge that a lot of trauma that people have isn't easily understood or recalled. We have complex trauma, relational trauma, historical trauma, and trauma-informed work needs to be avoiding shaming, blaming, and stigmatization, and also recognizing that nutrition can be deeply triggering. I have coined a term, nutritionist trauma. People have trauma from going to see a nutritionist, right? Like it was just too much, too difficult, and it left a scar. Trauma-informed is strength-focused, promotes resilience through inspiring healing through trust and safety. So let's get into the good stuff, right? This is the really emerging science. I've taken interest in it. I'm actually speaking at the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals Conference in March about ultra-processed foods and mental health. And this is like the first time that this conversation has been welcomed in the eating disorder space. This has been extremely taboo. Anytime you say anything about food and challenge all foods fit or intuitive eating, people get really nervous because there's been a sandcastle for many decades, and this science is challenging it, and it's challenging it. And I just want to introduce everyone to this topic and say there's a way to integrate this science and to be eating disorder informed at the same time. You get it? That is dialectical thinking. That is what we need in the field to be able to move forward. Get free of the groupthink and start really developing some of your own ideas and bringing together the science, and it will be the most helpful thing to patients. If you're not aware of the NOVA classification, we have 4 categories. The first is unprocessed, minimally processed, which is like, food in its natural state. You could see the corn on the cob. Processed culinary ingredients are things like sugar, salts, fats, flavors, etc. So if the corn was cut and then washed and then put in a solution and then canned, that would be a processed food. So processed foods are a combination of Nova 1, Nova 2 foods, but ultra processed foods are a little bit different. These are formulations of ingredients, usually Nova 2 foods, that are typically manufactured by a series of industrial practices that you wouldn't be able to do at home. So you think about the Captain Crunch, the Cheeto, stuff that you could never make in your own kitchen. Okay. We have data to suggest that 60% of calories in the US come from ultra processed foods. And these foods are consistently, I'm talking about large bodies of high quality literature linked to poor mental health, depression, anxiety. And hopefully I started with some of the mechanisms so you wouldn't start to assume that, yeah, maybe it's just SES or some of the other factors. Like, these are controlled studies, okay? Consistently linking ultra processed food to a wide range of adverse health outcomes, including all-cause mortality. The top is a ice cream. You could see the amount of ingredients in it. It's a typical Nova 4 binge food, right? You could see everyone here is familiar with ingredient lists, but the main point that I want to make is that when we talk about ultra processed foods, we're not just like really targeting ice cream, cookies, cake, pizza. We're also talking about diet foods, low calorie protein bars, right? The sort of thing you see at the bottom. It's a 190 calorie protein bar, same long list of ingredients. Hopefully most of us know what most of these things are. Some of them, benign. Some of them have data that clearly show they are not supportive of gut bacteria, pro-inflammatory, and adversive to mental health. Me personally, I like food that has vitamins and minerals inherent to the food rather than sprinkled on after the fact. So the US is the world leader in ultra processed foods. You could see here, this is from the Lancet recently, just mapping out some of the different caloric contributions from these UPFs. We also know that ultra processed foods affect the environment, and this is important, right? Some people get interested in health for their own personal reasons. Some people care about the environment, okay? It's been suggested that decreasing ultra processed foods can help improve environmental sustainability. So a lot of the things that are in ultra processed foods, colors, artificial sweeteners, emulsifiers, nanoparticles, they impact microbial composition in the gut ecosystem. They can compromise the mucosal barrier. We get encroachment across the barrier, an increase of pro-inflammatory potential, and endotoxemia, and a wide range of related symptoms. When we think about ultra processed food, we often think about what's added, right? It's not just in the food, by the way, it's also the packaging, the high heat processes, the neoformed compounds through jarring, the plastics that are involved. We have a lot of data now to suggest that the addition of these compounds can affect serotonin, can affect dopamine, can affect the blood-brain barrier, and can impact how different parts of the brain communicate with each other. But it's not just what's added to the ultra processed foods, it's what's lost. We know that processing of food compromises these sensitive nutrients like polyphenols, which are responsible for a lot of the antioxidant processes. These are complex, diverse chemical structures which are found in plant foods that have colors, green teas, etc. It's not just polyphenols that gut bacteria like, it's the fiber and the synergistic interaction between them. So if you give someone a polyphenol supplement and a fiber supplement, it won't actually work as good as the food itself. So I always remind folks the active ingredient in raspberry is raspberry. This is called food synergy, the way that things combine to create benefits for the gut ecosystem and for us, the host. We have data to suggest that ultra processed foods lead to dementia. These are longitudinal prospective cohort studies from the UK Biobank. People eating less processed foods associates with lower risk of dementia. And this is a life course perspective, a broader way of understanding human health and development. This looks at how risk factors and protective factors accumulate over time. I've done some work looking at ACEs. I've been a adverse childhood experience researcher now for many years. We did a systematic review a few years ago to show that those with multiple ACEs had a 46% increase in the odds of having a BMI above 30. We also looked at what are some of the biologically plausible explanations. If you're interested in the biological embedding of adversity, this is an excellent review. It's open access, and you should be able to get a pretty basic understanding of how the early psychosocial environment can lead to changes in biology that affect the developmental trajectory and essentially increase risk of a wide range of health outcomes. Just to give you a little snapshot, early life stress activates the immune system, macrophages and monocytes, with pro-inflammatory cascades lead to inflammation. It can cross the blood-brain barrier and lead to what is known as neuroinflammation. And a lot of this work on neuroinflammation, psychoneuroimmunology is being done at UCLA. So it's not just childhood adversity, but other contextual factors, living in a city, minoritized status, all of it affects the way the brain communicates. And this is sometimes referred to as salience. Salience is an important term in addiction. It's how the brain assigns value to something. It works with the memory to learn things. So if someone grows up in a stressful environment, parents are always fighting and they learn how to eat ultra processed foods at 9, 10 p.m. every night to help them go to sleep. The brain will assign more value to that ultra processed food. It will learn that that behavior reduces negative affect, and it will create potentially long lasting, persistent food related dysfunction. Some people could call it binge eating disorder. Other people might call it ultra processed food addiction. This topic has been canceled by the eating disorder community, canceled by dietitians, at least from my point of view. I know that there's a lot of people who are on board. I've really stood my ground here and said, this is real. I've worked with people with substance use disorders for my whole career. And yeah, I think that the controversy is no longer, it's becoming more clear that the phenomenon is real. What's less clear is what to do about it. I think part of the reason why people are so angry at food addiction is because it's a lot of the Instagram and the group coaching things that are out there. A lot of the sort of lay public interpretation of it means that it has to be rigid, weight loss focused, ketogenic dieting. But those of us that are eating disorder researchers and professionals are starting to look at it a little bit differently. We're looking at it more as a social justice issue, a public health issue, right? Food companies basically getting away with whatever they want and using the same playbook that the big cigarette companies used, big tobacco, right? Focusing on personal responsibility, vilifying critics, again, calling people food fascists. Anyone who's concerned about the food supply is now an orthorexic, and always emphasizing physical activity. This is the classic tagline. There's no bad foods. There's no good foods or no bad foods. And this really is something that I agree with to some extent, but you could see how food companies have co-opted the eating disorder recovery message and really amplified it in the space to create this additional layer of contention. So I've always been interested in conflicts of interest, public-private partnerships. Many of you might know me as a founder of Dietitians for Professional Integrity, 2012, 13, 14, 15. We made some waves in the field to help expose some of this stuff. And there's progress that's been made, but still a lot of work to do. We know that big food and big pharma are in cahoots. They tend to put their private profits ahead of public health. And this is not like evil. It's actually called capitalism. They have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. They have incredible resources to influence the public discourse, to control narratives around health. They form front groups. And I think it's safe to say that in this Western medicine model, a lot of dietitians are sometimes trained to be a part of the system. And if you opt out of the system, you're looked at as like you've gone rogue, right? You're not part of this healthcare system. And it leads dietitians to feel conflict. You want a good steady job, right? That has benefits, but like if you're in the system, you got to do things that are difficult. So maybe you've heard the adage, a sick society is a profitable society. I've learned that whenever people like speak up the way I am kind of right now, they're attacked, discredited, called a conspiracy theorist, purveyor of misinformation, perpetuating diet culture, etc. So when it comes to food addiction, I want to make this clear. It doesn't require food abstinence. Sometimes behavioral abstinence works better. It doesn't have to be pass fail. You hopefully got the sense that I'm interested in nuance, harm reduction. It does require recovery. It does require trauma work, bringing the body back in, meditation, yoga, lifestyle medicine, all the things that we know work that you usually can't do in the constraints of the healthcare system. But brains can be rewired. Self-destructive black and white thinking can change. We can help people cognitively restruct. I want to share my data from my private practice, nutrition and recovery. I've actually been collecting data for the last 3 years, and I just prepped some of this for submission to a large journal, and I'm waiting for some feedback. But I will share that I collect ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, PTSD with the PCL5. I have a food frequency questionnaire where I look at the intake of ultra-processed foods, ultra-processed food addiction measured by the modified Yale Food Addiction Scale, and eating disorder symptoms measured by the EDEQ short form. And this is structural equation modeling using mediation models. And these are standardized estimates. So they're all sort of in relation to each other. The data that I have suggests that the link between ACEs and eating disorders is mediated by PTSD. No surprise there. But we have this emerging data to show that the link between ACEs and eating disorders is actually mediated by ultra-processed food, including the diet foods, the almond milks, the protein powders, the protein bars, right? And ultra-processed food addiction symptoms, which are contributing to the ED. So let me just spell this out in clear terms. The eating disorder world assumes that any food addiction symptoms are generated from dieting, that any sort of loss of control eating comes from dieting. And this newer science that we're doing, myself and many others, suggests that binge eating is not the precursor. Dieting is not the precursor to all binge eating, that for many people, it's the opposite. It's that people start dieting because of addiction like eating, because of hedonic eating, and that we actually need to target the food environment to get people to have better trauma treatment, less exposure to ultra-processed foods. And this is actually what's going to help this rising incidence and prevalence of eating disorders, right? And this is nutrition for mental health, the nuance that is deeply needed. So I'm going to share in the last few minutes about a free resource called Wise Mind Nutrition. I spent the last 2 years bringing together all this energy and packaging it into an app. My tagline, or one of them, is to improve your brain without taxing your mind. So really what we're trying to do is help people improve gut health, help people improve brain health without getting lost in any sort of dieting, anything that can confer risk for disordered eating, any sort of counting, right? Full qualitative nutrition. And this is about setting intentions, which I'll cover. There's a food log in there. It's all free. A nightly review where you can look back at your day and see how you did in terms of food groups, intentions that you set. There's a connection feature, which I'll briefly discuss. And then there's videos, components of the framework, cooking lessons, guided meditations, There's blogs that are scientific with references. There's recipes. I've broken down my recipes by herbs, by the way, because people, they buy a parsley or they buy a basil or a dill and it goes bad in the fridge. You can buy one of those things and then have it several days in a row with different sort of recipes. So I'm really trying to be innovative here, change the nutrition landscape, get people to think about things in a new way. No calories, no macros. You get it? We're not doing AI. We're doing like connect to food. Go to the grocery store. Set some intentions for eating a wide variety of plant colors. And when people log their food, it just checks off hunger scores, fullness scores, what food groups were there. It totals them up at the end of the day. And you can look at your day and say, what did I do well today? What could I have done better? What corrective measures can I take? And then it circles that back into the next day. So in the framework, I like to emphasize consideration of when to eat, what to eat, how much to eat. And then my favorite one is how to think about food, thinking about rules versus principles, cognitive rigidity versus cognitive fluidity. I'll post this handout in the chat box afterward. I'm going to post a few links of lots of cool free resources for you all if you're interested. And then, yeah, there's a food log, which can be supportive for some people. You don't have to use the food log to use the app and watch the videos. The modules are there. But yeah, people can use the food group system, figure out which food groups maybe they're not getting enough of, how to boost that up. It totals it up for you in real time so you could see what's overrepresented and what might be underrepresented. And then, yes, mindful eating stuff, hunger, fullness, journaling, thoughts, feelings, behaviors. And you can follow your clients if you're interested. There's a connection feature, which when someone does a nightly review, and they look at their intentions and they confirm their food logs, you're able to see what your clients are up to, what they're eating, what they're journaling. I really built it to augment my private practice, but I built it for professionals to use with their clients as well. My experience so far is that, I'm going to say it, the therapists, the mental health professionals, they're loving it. I've had the sense that some dietitians feel threatened by it because it's like, it feels like it's here to replace a dietitian. And I promise you it's not. It's that the basic education for nutrition for mental health is here in the app, and you can focus on the counseling, the more important stuff, right? And of course, if you want to go over the hunger fullness scale and the food group system for your counseling session, that's all you want to do, then don't do it. If you want to outsource some of that and then focus on the real stuff with the people, right? This app is for you. The personalized program is targeted messaging based on mental health scores. So ADHD, anxiety, depression, addictions, eating disorders, PTSD. And so there are targeted messages based on people's mental health scores. And the coolest part, after the program, people fill out the tools again, and they could see how their mental health changes over time. So 43 modules, you go through the thing, you're able to see how maybe depression scores have gone down, and you can keep going through, and there's graphs that show. And I think when people see, oh my God, my PTSD symptoms have gone down, my depression has gone down, the yoga, the nutrition, the meditation, the constructive eating has really helped me. People are interested in nutrition, and it's not a vanity thing, it's a sanity thing. So yeah, here are some of the modules. I focus on sleep, beverages, macros, micros, all in the context of mental health. Okay. So a lot of information on mindful eating, hunger, fullness, anti-inflammatory, gut health. I break down some of the food groups, and you can see this is just an example of a module. There's a 7-8 minute video. There's assignments. There's little gems that people can store, a meditation, cooking class, recipes, resources. I basically put my life's work in the cloud, and I'm just making it accessible to people as a no cost, low cost option. Options for people to look at: anti-inflammatory foods, prebiotic foods, just everything that someone would need to move the needle on mental health. There's definitely a Mediterranean style energy in there. I try not to use the term Mediterranean diet for obvious reasons, but there is definitely a lot of the tenets of Mediterranean style eating that I support and endorse. And then, of course, body image, cognitive flexibility, rules, principles. It's embedded throughout the program. And there's also a little bit of spiritual messaging. Okay. So it's not just clinical stuff. It's designed to help people think differently about nutrition and health. Eating represents our most profound interaction with nature daily. I'm sure that kind of energy might rub some people the wrong way. Um, Nothing religious by any means, but just inviting people to connect to food, to go to the grocery store, to make food at home, and to look at it as being more profound than calories and macros. And then, of course, being able to see how mental health changes over time. And as I start wrapping up, maybe you're aware of, food for mood and brain health. I'll just throw a couple at you. Brazil nuts have a lot of selenium, can be helpful for depressive symptoms. Multiple studies there. Walnuts with omega-3 fatty acids, pumpkin seeds, magnesium, as well as other things, fermented foods, fermented dairies, fermented cabbage, nutritional yeast, particularly for plant-forward eaters, shiitake mushrooms, kiwi, don't forget to eat the skin. Gut bacteria love kiwi skin. I'm big on the kiwi skin. Seaweed have really interesting fiber profiles and are linked to some very positive health outcomes. And of course, cacao. So just to summarize, what is eating for mental health? What is nutrition for mental health? Maybe it's more about variety. We have data to suggest that eating 30 different plants per week improves gut health, improves mental health. So for example, teaching someone how to eat 8 fruits, 9 vegetables, 4 whole grains, 3 beans, 3 nuts, 3 seeds, and get a lot more rotation. I do a lot of work on variety, helping someone get 30 grams of fiber per day, only counting until you learn, and reminding folks that you probably aren't going to get at if you're not eating whole grains and beans. And then my favorite thing, and this is what I do with the food log, by the way, I look at people's food logs all the time. I have a busy private practice. I just look for colors. I just want to see colors from food, right? I task people all the time. Let's get a blue purple every day, whether it be blueberry, blackberry, eggplant, purple radish, purple that's in the asparagus and the broccoli. That's the universe's way of saying, hey, pick me, right? Yellow, orange food, green food, red food, trying to get all the colors every day. So yeah, the interventions change. And I know this would look crazy in a chart, like for an insurance company. It's like, eat all food groups daily, get 3 food groups when you eat, get all the colors of the rainbow, right? Get a lot of variety. But this is, I think, the way forward, because nutrition has become reduced to this biomedical model, and people aren't getting as good as we could get. And I think this different language, different outcomes could be very helpful, particularly with respect to behavioral health, disordered eating, etc. And then, of course, meeting sensory needs, food that's hot, cold, crunchy, creamy, savory, sweet, chewy, etc. Food for thought is no substitute for the real thing. So what can a dietitian do? You can educate patients on the biology of trauma and depression. You're not treating trauma, you're not treating depression, but you can talk about some of the mechanisms. You can explain how some of those pathways could be modified by diet. You can help people set intentions for eating food for mood and brain health, rather than just changing food for your blood pressure or for your cholesterol. Let's focus on different outcomes, shifting the narrative from math-centric approaches to help people build more trust in their body, focusing on quality over quantity. And this is the contentious area, teaching people to eat less ultra-processed foods in a gentle way. Not necessarily telling them what not to eat, telling people what to eat and letting their body figure that out in due time. So always being mindful of the risk of disordered eating. And I think that's one of my gifts. I'm able to really live in that nuanced space. Understanding that health is not just a choice, behavior change can be tricky, and of course, collaborating with other professionals. So let's bring nuance back. Let's bring dialectics into the picture. And I'm happy to answer any questions. The first email is my clinical practice. I guess I should share that one more time in case anyone wants it. That email is my clinical practice. And I have, of course, the app. If anyone wants to try using it with your patients or clients and need support, I will help you. It's a really awesome tool. And please follow me on social media, send a message. I'd love to connect.